Hello, hello! I'm talking today about the combative Archbishop Geoffrey of York. He was born circa 1152, the eldest but illegitimate son of King Henry II of England and an unknown mistress. One of Geoffrey's later opponents, the diplomat Walter Mab, named his mother as a whore called Eganai, but this may have been baseless slander. In any event, Geoffrey enjoyed a regal upbringing alongside his legitimate half-brothers, Henry the Young King, Geoffrey Duke of Brittany, Richard Lionheart, and of course, John. As a child, Geoffrey entered the church, a political rather than a spiritual decision, almost certainly decreed by his father, who wanted to make him the Bishop of Lincoln. While Geoffrey ascended the ranks of the clergy so quickly that even the Pope became suspicious, he was never officially ordained as Lincoln's bishop, and a decade of debate on the matter eventually ended in Geoffrey's resignation. By that time, he had proven his worth in other ways. In 1173, while most of his half-brothers raised a revolt against their father's rule, the loyal Geoffrey worked to pacify unrest in northern England. He fronted an army and captured rebel castles, persuaded the powerful Bishop of Durham to swear his allegiance, and even defeated the brazen old lord Roger de Mowbray of Thirsk. King Henry II was so grateful for Geoffrey that he was heard to declare, "My other sons are the real bastards. This is the only one who's proven himself legitimate." Geoffrey was duly rewarded with castles and lucrative offices, and in 1181 he became King Henry's chancellor in England. True to the end, Geoffrey was at his father's side in 1189 when his half-brother sparked yet another revolt. He also headed his father's bodyguard when they were forced to flee Le Mans, and ultimately, he was the only one of Henry's sons to be present when the tired old king died on 6 July. While his half-brother Richard inherited the throne of England, Geoffrey moved to occupy another important office, the vacant Archbishopric of York. Once again, however, his seizure of a high church office did not come without protest. Geoffrey had many opponents in the north, both inside and outside of the church, and many of these now raised objections. York's own cathedral chapter disputed his election, and perhaps most importantly, King Richard made things even more difficult by filling other church positions with Geoffrey's enemies. Then, as he prepared to embark on crusade, Richard went even further and banned his half-brother from entering England at all. Well, Geoffrey quickly commenced to round after round of negotiation, and he eventually secured his office 2 years later. The half-brothers were then officially, if grudgingly, reconciled at Tours in June 1191, just before Richard at last departed for the Holy Land, and Geoffrey received his consecration in the same city that August. Eager to assume his new post, Geoffrey returned to England shortly afterward, but alas, he had barely reached Dover when yet another of his enemies, William Longchamp, whom Richard had left in charge as England's chancellor, ordered his immediate arrest. Geoffrey fled for refuge to St. Martin's Priory, but Longchamp's agents pursued him and even dragged him out, imprisoning him at Dover Castle. This actually worked out in Geoffrey's favor, since it was considered a heinous crime to harm anyone, especially a cleric, who had sought the sanctuary of a church. Besides, everyone remembered the recent appalling murder of Thomas Becket, and anyway, many were quite tired of Chancellor Longchamp's arrogant and overbearing attitude. The kingdom's bishops duly voiced their outrage and demanded Geoffrey's release. Longchamp was forced to comply, and although he claimed innocence, blaming his agents for exceeding his orders, he was thoroughly disgraced. Not only was Geoffrey released, he then joined the council at Loudon Bridge, which saw to Longchamp's deposition. The triumphant Archbishop Geoffrey finally reached York in November 1191, and he promptly set to imposing his newfound authority. He put his old foe, the Bishop of Durham, in his place, and he soon reignited that age-old rivalry with his counterpart, the Archbishop of Canterbury, by arguing throughout his tenure over whose jurisdiction superseded whose. In 1193, from his powerful position in Yorkshire, Geoffrey next opposed his half-brother John, who infamously tried to seize all of England while King Richard was away. A warlike bishop, Geoffrey strengthened Doncaster to keep it from falling to John's supporters, and he helped to besiege John's castle at Tickhill until Richard's return in March 1194. Despite his successes, Geoffrey's career was already steeped in controversy. He was widely accused of extortion, simony, and neglect of duty. He was known to energetically fight and appeal for what he wanted, and when that didn't work, he simply excommunicated his opponents. In 1195, he was finally summoned to Rome to answer for a whole slew of charges which had been lodged against him by his own cathedral chapter. When he failed to answer this important summons in time, Pope Celestine III suspended him from office. Well, that prompted Geoffrey to hurry off to Rome, where he managed to overturn the decision. He also patched up his relations with the papacy, so that when King Richard attempted to prevent his half-brother from returning to York, he received a stern reprimand from the Pope. In 1199, King Richard died, and John inherited the throne of England more legitimately. For a moment, it seemed as if the two remaining half-brothers might actually cooperate. But John had a knack for pushing boundaries, and Geoffrey never accepted a slight to his honor. Furthermore, John's long, expensive war with the King of France meant that he was always strapped for cash. He turned increasingly to taxes to raise the funds he needed, despite the groans of his subjects, and although it was technically illegal for him to tax the clergy, that's exactly what he decided to do. Geoffrey, of course, was among the first of England's bishops to refuse. Numerous rounds of negotiations followed, and the half-brothers actually reconciled on several occasions. But neither side was really willing to compromise, and peace never held. Geoffrey went on to excommunicate the sheriff and other agents who came to collect the tax in Yorkshire, and he led the other bishops of England in a general protest from 1207. Ultimately, under pressure, Geoffrey took to exile in Normandy, but he maintained his stubborn stance right up until his death at Grandmont Abbey on 12 December 1212. That's the life of Archbishop Geoffrey of York. Thank you so much for watching.